Okay, I will now call the hearing to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. This morning I will be chairing. My name is Robert Atkins. On my direct left is Ms. McFadden. On my far left is Mr. Sawatsky, representing the Assessment and Taxation Department. City of Winnipeg is Ms. Martins, and our secretary today is Ms. Sutherland. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by this Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed further to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with this board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, we will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony, followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions based on evidence presented here today. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And everybody, please make sure their cell phones are on complete silence. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Smith and Ms. Martins. Katie, could you swear in the parties, please?
Please state your name.
Jennifer Martins.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please state your name.
Trevor Smith.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, first property on the docket today is 1060 Chevrier Boulevard. We're dealing with a 2020 realty assessment. No issues to deal with to begin with, so Ms. Martins, when you are ready, please, 1060 Chevrier Boulevard.
This one is roll number 0309300240. The assessed value is $3,030,000. This property was built in 2018. It's zoned R2, so residential two-family. It has a land to plan area of 2.35 with a gross floor area of 12,718 square feet. If we look on page 3, we have our income workup. This property has 12 suites. We have 4 one-bedroom suites and 8 two-bedroom suites. The average monthly rent per suite is $1,550. This gives us a potential gross income of $223,200. We have a vacancy at 2.4%, with expenses at 41.59%, and a cap rate of 4.2%. This gives us our estimated value of $3,030,000. On page 2, we have a few rental comparables, and on page 4 and 5, we have some cap rate evidence. And there's some legislation on the back page. There's no income and expense workup for our mailer for this one because it was built in 2018. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yes, I just have a few and some rebuttal evidence following that.
Okay.
So with regard to the valuation of the property, it's all model driven, of course?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And and just in general with the properties today, given workload, you haven't had time to view them, I'm sure.
I have not inspected any of the properties or any of the comparables.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at your page number 4 and the multifamily cap rate ranges here. So we have a low of 4.3 and a high of, or rather, low of 4 and a high of 7.3 for all categories, and then 20th to 80th percentile is showing 4.9 to 5.3%. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the subject itself is capped at 4.2%, I see.
Yes.
Is there, can you explain how the cap rate is applied to this one?
It was through the model, but I'm going to say that the age of this particular building is probably a motivating factor to getting one that's on the low side, as well as being in the neighborhood it's in, and as well as the quality of construction, as well as the size.
Okay. Being a newly built apartment, would there be any opportunity for improvement of the revenue stream?
In regards to being compared to other properties of
No,
this age, or?
No, just specifically to this property, would you be able to renovate the property and increase your rent?
It's possible that you could put in higher quality finishes and that would garner a higher rent, or, you know, putting in a jet tub instead of a regular tub. I'm not sure what they have in there.
Okay.
But I'm sure if you put in luxury carpet as opposed to standard carpet, that these could all be things that anyone could do in order to garner more rent, regardless of the age.
Would it be likely that a brand new constructed apartment would receive renovation to increase the rental value, rental rates?
Chances are it just received all the upgrades that it will be for the next couple of
Thank
years.
you. Looking at page number 5 and the capitalization rate evidence that is presented there, I see that there's four multifamily properties on the chart halfway down the page.
Yes.
So these properties would have been included in the City of Winnipeg's model for apartments?
I'm assuming they were, but this was an analysis not done to take apart our original capitalization rate, but it was done to supplement, just to show a few examples of what has happened in the market and how our rates are within reason with what is actually happening. It's just a few examples.
Right, okay. I'm just looking at the examples that are there. We have a range of 4.03 up to 5%.
Yes.
And then I look at the multifamily range overall that the city has, and it's 4 to 7.3%. So we have a very narrow band of the market that's presented there. Is that
Yes.
fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. I do have some rebuttal evidence on the capitalization rates that are presented on page 5, if
Okay.
you'd like to do that.
Mr. Smith, maybe we'll question the assessor first, the panel, and then we'll deal with the rebuttal.
Okay.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the
I
assessor?
have no question.
Okay, thank you. Ed, any questions?
You've indicated no parking in indoor or outdoor. Is that correct? Is there no parking for the units?
We don't have any information about any type of income for the parking, so it's not that there is no parking, it's that
It's
we've
not.
not included it because it is such a new building.
So the assumption is that it's included as part of the rent?
Well, yes, and the assumption is that we will, when we start getting the income information, that we will revisit it.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Ed. Ms. Martins, first of all, location, where is this located on Chevrolet? Do you know?
I'm not 100% sure.
Mr. Smith, do you?
It is in my brief there.
Okay,
It's
well,
between
okay.
Pembina and the next street before the tracks,
So west of Pembina.
west of Pembina, yes.
Perfect, okay, thank you. Ms. Martins, any details on the permit value on this construction? Do you have anything detailed there?
No, not with me.
Not with you, okay? And any details on the new dwelling inspection, what the rental rates are? Actual?
I didn't have any of that in any of my notes.
Okay,
It's from 2018, so
Yeah.
we're waiting to get the mailers.
they're waiting for the mailers. Okay, so nobody inspected it and did a...
They inspected it.
Yeah.
But they didn't have, I couldn't find the rental rate.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you, that's my only questions. Okay, Mr. Smith, you've got rebuttal
I do, yes.
to present, okay? Katie, would you mind picking that up and distributing it to the panel members, thanks, and the assessor? Thanks. Okay, I'm not sure if you've seen this before, Ms. Martins, but
No.
I guess we'll let Mr. Smith present and then you can analyze it at that time.
Okay, so again, this is just with regard to the city's capitalization rates as presented on page 5, and their inclusion in the model, and of course, what that conveys about the detail that's included in the city's model. So looking at the front page here, the city of Winnipeg, and I believe this is in their brief, page number 4, indicates that the city of Winnipeg follows the International Association of Assessing Officers regulations, essentially, in arriving at how their model is constructed and how they determine their capitalization rates, and indeed what properties sales are included in there. So this document that you're looking at here, the front couple of pages are from the IAAO. It's the standard on verification and adjustment of sales. And it applies to all assessing bodies that follow the IAAO standard. So if you flip to the third page there, you can see section number 5 is entitled Sales Verification, and then I've highlighted 5.10, which is Property Characteristic Changes. And if you flip to the fourth page, which is numbered 13 at the bottom, I'll just read briefly to you here. 5.10, Property Characteristic Changes. Sales data files should reflect the physical characteristics of the property when sold. For ratio studies, if significant physical changes have occurred to the property between the date of sale and the appraisal date, the sale should not be included. So what this is stating is that if the property is purchased and then receives significant renovation after that date, prior to the hearing, that sale should not be included in the ratio study, so it should not be included in the city's evidence as far as capitalization rate goes. And what we see an awful lot of in the Winnipeg marketplace is investors purchasing older properties that have some lower rents and have some opportunity to be repositioned in the marketplace. So they will buy these older properties, invest in renovating the units and, again, significantly increase their rents in that way. So they're not buying the income stream that they're getting as of the purchase date. They're buying what they will convert it to and be able to generate from it in the future. So that 5.10 property characteristic changes specifically addresses that. So properties that have significant changes should not be included in the city's cap rate studies. So looking at the sales that are presented, sale number 191 Roche, pardon me. We have the sales questionnaire here from the purchaser, and it specifically states that it was purchased with the intent to renovate. If you read through the material, I think it's number 16 down there. Did you intend to make major repairs or improvements to the property? They've checked off yes, and then they have suite upgrades there that they're obviously were intending to do at that time. Following purchase, you can also see that the rents were relatively low. If you move forward a couple of pages, the rents for the property were between $514 and $797 for the units themselves. Moving on to the next property, 394 Talbot. We've confirmed the information that we're presenting here with the source. The property, again, this property 394 Talbot was purchased for renovation by the new owner, and has been totally renovated since the purchase date. And again, their original rents were on the low side of market, so they've been significantly increased following renovation. So again, you have a property that's been repositioned in the marketplace, and the original purchase price is not reflective of the income stream that they were buying. So it's not a true capitalization rate to be relied upon. Sale number, and indeed, if you flip to what's numbered, page number 16, it shows the increase in rents to $800 and $900 with new kitchens, bathrooms, refinished hardwoods, etc. Flipping on to 285 Maxwell. Again, this property was purchased with the intent to renovate. We have confirmed again with the source that we're presenting here that this was the case. Again, kitchens and bathrooms were renovated significantly, and I believe that information is included there. If you look at the very back page, again, you can see that the rents are on the low side for the market, and following renovation, obviously, the rental rates for these properties would have significantly improved. So this is a theme in the marketplace. You will see, if you take the straight income at sale on a property like this and the sale price, the net operating income and the sale price, and produce a cap rate, it's going to produce a low cap rate. But they're not true cap rates because they're not buying that property as it sits. They're buying what they're going to convert it to. And the important thing on those three particular sales to note is that they don't meet the IAAO standard for inclusion in ratio studies, for inclusion in a cap rate study itself, because they have been significantly changed subsequent to the purchase. The fourth sale that is there, 333 Ward, this has been talked about very frequently. I'm not presenting information again on it today. We've confirmed with the purchaser with regard to the true capitalization rate that was paid. They bought the property, first of all, very sophisticated, large-scale multifamily investor. They also own other categories of investment properties, very sophisticated, they know what they're doing. They reviewed the material for the property as presented to them when it was available for public sale. They determined that the expenses that were in place at the time were somewhat on the high side with regard to some of the operational issues, and that they would be able to operate it in a more efficient manner. And so their true capitalization rate, based on how they knew the property would operate, was 5.44%. This has been presented many times. They have subsequently owned it for a period of time and have operated it in the manner that they had stated, and it indeed does have the lower expenses as they expected. So the cap rate of 5% is not representative of what the intent and true purchase of the property was representative of. And that is my rebuttal on the cap rates.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, maybe to start, you would like to comment on the reason for why you presented these 4 sales in this cap rate study. I believe there's an explanation at the top of page 5.
Yes. These 4, they're just a sample of actual sales that took place during the reference period. Purpose for showing these individual capitalization rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived capitalization rates. They're not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property, especially in this case, as these are apartment buildings, and we are dealing with more like townhouse type buildings. These are not representative of the style of property. They're just trying to represent examples to show that what we have modeled is coming from actual sales that we have the information for. The net operating income has been developed through stabilizing owner-reported income and expense information that is received by our department. The capitalization rates have been derived by dividing the property's net operating income as reported to us by its sale price. It does happen that there are differences in the income that is reported and the income that is used. There's instances where there's a discrepancy between years of tax that is used. There's a very common discrepancy that because the tax can be estimated for the year of the sale, that's the tax amount that should be used, and that is something that we have been working on trying to sort out what the appropriate tax amount is, and we have standardized it that we use the same year of sale as the rent that we are using.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I just, yeah, because you didn't read that out.
No.
Because, I mean, all of us are seeing this presented now all of a sudden as individual cap rates, and, yeah, I know there's a kind of a preamble here of what it represents, I guess. Sorry, I just was getting the clarification on that. Yeah. Okay.
I have more to say, or I can take questions, whatever you
Yeah,
prefer.
okay, let's let Ms. Martins question you first on the cap, on this rebuttal, please.
It's tough because this is the first time I'm trying to read through all this. You went into the information on Ward, but we don't have any of the information from Ward with us.
No, I've probably presented it about 5 times before this panel, and frankly, I was looking for my copy of it this morning to bring for the 6th or 7th time, whatever it is. I feel that we've covered this adequately numerous times, probably with all three panel members. I could present it again. It's, and again, no reflection on the assessor, but it's been covered many times, so I would hope that the city would investigate what has been presented at this point and determine whether what is being stated is accurate as it is.
Can I chime in here?
Well,
From what I remember, it was 18, you're saying 18.8 million rather than 18 million? So it made the cap rate 5.23? Was that the argument?
No.
That there was an appraisal at 18 million done prior to the purchase and, okay, so that's,
That's not my evidence.
that's not, okay. That's somebody else's evidence, okay, on the
See,
same
so-
address.
And it's
Wait,
presented by
yeah.
so many people that it's,
Yeah,
I don't know what the numbers are that
Fair enough.
you're off, because I know that there's a discrepancy between with the
Yeah,
method of stabilizing and whether it's fair to stabilize some of the expenses using just the cheapest, the lowest amount of the 3 years, or if it should be an average. So there's a lot of discussion about the stabilization of the expenses, and that's actually making a very large difference in the cap rate on that one.
Mhm.
And,
you know, in all fairness, you haven't presented it. You haven't challenged it on her sheet, so
Well-
maybe we'll leave it where it is. How's
I'm
that?
challenging it verbally, and my evidence
Okay.
is that we had specific discussions with the new owner, the purchaser, and their agent with regard to the basis on which they purchased it. So the property was for sale on the open market. It was an offering with very detailed package. They reviewed the in-depth material, went through it with a fine-tooth comb, as they do, and they determined that there were, and this wasn't a large owner that had 333 Ward, they determined that there were efficiencies that were not being capitalized there, and that the expenses would indeed be lower. So they bought it on that specific basis. So the original numbers aside, and yes, there are some variabilities there, not the purchase price, the purchase price, but the with regard to the methodology. But beyond that, the intent and knowledge of the owner was such that they knew that the NOI would be greater than it was, because the expenses were too high in some categories,
Okay.
as they knew.
So to summarize, the assessor's saying, according to their methodology, the cap rate is 5%, and you are saying
5.44 is the.
5.44, okay.
may I touch on one other thing about the rebuttal?
Of course, yeah, I was just trying to get that one out of the
Yeah.
way. Yeah, of course, go ahead. Jen.
Okay, in regards to 394 Talbot and 285 Maxwell Place, we don't have the page that was included with the first property, where the initial sale were on 191 Roach. They say specifically that they were going to do, intend to do repairs. So on, for the other two properties, we have a letter dated in 2019 saying that they are intending to do repairs. However, when we're doing our analysis, we did our analysis significantly before September 25th and 26th of 2019. So we don't know what the information was when it was sent in, whether or not it's stated that they were going to do repairs. I'm assuming that that might not be the case, considering he emailed them in September after we started presenting this information to request if their intention to do renovations. And what we have here on the last page of my brief, under the Municipal Assessment Acts excerpts, in section 54, 3.1, it's almost at the bottom, where in response to a request for information or documentation under clause 16(1)(c), a person provided information that was substantially at variance with information that he or she presented at a hearing, The presiding officer of the board or panel may order that the information presented by the person at the hearing is not to be considered by the board or panel in making its decision. We rely on the information that comes in from people when they're reporting things, that is what we can use as a basis. So when they're changing their mind, because this was initially sent, the due date was May 2017, and this one was May 2019, and now in September of 2019, they're sending different information after we've started the hearing process. It's very difficult for us to create our rules using the information that has been submitted when all of a sudden at the hearings, we're getting alternate information. We request this information as a basis of finding value. So when we're getting different information here and there and everywhere, it's, the inconsistency makes it very difficult.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Smith? His rebuttal?
Do you have the other pages where they've said whether or not they intended to purchase these initially?
They're not our specific client, so no, they're not going to send us their documentation that we sent into the city. We have to call and question owners, as I hope that the city does as well, and converse with representatives of those particular ownership groups as well. With regard to the submission of the information, there's no, if you look at, and while I understand that the city is saying that we send out these forms and they should be completed in minute detail by all owners, if you look at the form, they're fairly extensive. Not all owners necessarily have the time or complete them themselves. It may be done by their third-party manager, etc. So it's not that there's any intent to mislead here or anything of that nature. It's simply that maybe a box was not checked on submission by some parties. And indeed, in the cases that we're talking about, we're not looking at those specific pages anyway. I think the information as presented on those sale number 2, Talbot, and number 3, 285 Maxwell, it's very clear that the properties were purchased with the intent to renovate and renovated, and then the rent increase as shown in the material. So whether we have the original sale questionnaire page or not, as I stated, they're not our specific clients. That's not information that's available to them.
You know, I'm gonna make a comment here. You know, the assessor stated that these aren't specific evidence for this specific property. We're seeing these cap rate examples presented on newer buildings, older buildings, and I think the preamble here states they're not to be considered direct evidence for the subject property, even though
I specifically understand that.
Yeah.
And my presentation is not such that I disagree with their use for this specific property. It's that they should not be included in the first place because they don't meet the standard.
Okay.
And it's indicative of what is included in the city's model for capitalization rates. If these are part of it,
yeah.
how many more are there? Quite a few.
Okay. All right, so Ms. Martins, you're done with rebuttal questioning or something arising?
Well, it's just restating that according to the information that we've received, potentially Roche is, because they did say that it was being purchased for extensive renovation, but the other two, all the information that we received is that that wasn't what the intention was. So with all the if that's what we get, then we are following the standards by the basis of the information that we received.
Okay, fair enough, okay. Linda, any questions of the rebuttal?
Yes, just quickly, just to be really clear. The evidence you're presenting, the point you're trying to make here is that these artificially lower the city's cap rates on the larger scale, right? So that
Correct.
to look at those cap rates, we're looking at lower ones, right? That's what you're trying to tell us?
Yes, they don't meet the requirements for inclusion, not that the city didn't have the information, that's fine, but once they discover that they don't meet them, they should be taken out. And yes, it artificially lowers the cap rate range.
Just a quick question for the assessor.
Mhm.
How many sales would be included in a larger study for, when you're doing this?
I'm not one of the modelers. The modelers are the ones that know. They take into account all of the sales that happen in the city, and then they evaluate which ones are included. I'm not part of the process.
So you don't know whether they'd be tens or hundreds or? No.
It depends on the properties, it depends on, I'm
Okay.
not privy to
Thank
that
you.
information.
Thank you.
Ed, any questions?
No, thank you.
Helen? Pardon me? No, okay. Okay, Mr. Smith, I got a couple here. From what you just said, I'm just looking at your highlighted 5.10.
Yes.
So it says, what you said, significant changes between the date of sale and appraisal date. But then the next line, it says, the sale may be valid for mass appraisal modeling by matching the sale price to the characteristics that existed on the date of sale. And then it kind of, well, it says that if there's gonna be, the example gives a 1.4% value of improvements shouldn't be considered on a larger sale. And then it goes on to say that a 16.7% improvement should be considered as invalidating that sale. That's what it's saying there?
So, let's just discuss that. So what they're looking at, and if you look at the amounts of the properties that they're talking about there, that would be residential sales essentially that you're looking at.
Okay.
And their examples are, they're looking at it in that residential sphere. But your point with regard to the line after what I've highlighted, where the sale may still be valid for mass appraisal modeling by matching the sale price to the characteristics that existed on the date of sale, so fine. If that were the case, and I disagree that you could do this accurately, but if you're, theoretically, if you're to take that, so you've got a renovated property, where clearly it's going to rent for more, so you would have to make that adjustment. You'd have to make the adjustment to what the rent that they would generate for those renovated units would be, and your NOI would change, and you would have a higher cap rate.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you, the first example you used was 191 Roach, and you've included that sales questionnaire, it's marked as page 11.
Yes.
191 Roach. Okay, first of all, the sale comes up at $3.61 million, and you're saying, and they're declaring that they're gonna spend, I think it says here $100,000, which equals a 3% update cost. If their declaration is accurate. You can see how this would be difficult for anybody to make adjustments to this, but they're declaring $100,000, 3%. They've got an appraisal on the property of $3.725 million.
Sure.
That they declared on here. So if you've got a declaration or a 3% update, does that really invalidate that sale for?
Well, so it's, and I know that we were looking at in the IAAO information where they provided the example and said,
Yeah.
1.4 is,
Yeah.
Anyway, the percentages, it's not that's not the point, so they've renovated the units, so maybe they redid the flooring and refaced the kitchen cabinetry or something expensive. I don't know specifically what they did for that unit.
I know.
So $100,000, it's not a large property. They probably renovated all of the units, and the intent clear intent was to increase the rent. So, again, following 5.10, if, and I disagree that it should be included at all, but if you're to take that second sentence after that, that it may be valid, you have to make that adjustment. And in an income property, that adjustment would be what would the rent to be achieved on those renovated units be, which would increase your NOI and increase the cap rate.
Okay, so I just did a quick calculation. Now, whether that $100,000 is accurate, it's anybody's guess, but that comes up to $2,700 a suite, which means they probably painted and decorated, maybe some new floor finish. And so it's kind of a standard upgrade, I guess, really, isn't it?
It's an upgrade, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I wish that I had the post renovation rents to show you here, but clearly if you look at the rents that they were getting, they were on the low side, $514 for a bachelor, $663 for a two-bed, etc.
Yeah, okay.
Those are going to have gone up,
Okay.
and that changes the cap rate.
Yeah. Now, you know, we might as well, I think we're doing this specifically, or pardon me, for all the properties today.
Correct.
We're gonna apply this document. and-
Yes,
Yeah,
no
so we
need
might
to-
as well deal with it now.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so, it sells in, February 2018 for 3.61 million. I assume, that these are bona fide sales, that there was a real estate agent involved probably, who was a professional who marketed this property
It met all the requirements, yes.
and came up with a value based on the current income, I guess. Now, what I wonder is, I've heard the argument, there's an opportunity involved here. So is the vendor, if I was a vendor, and I knew that I had an old apartment block that had future development, and I knew there were purchasers out there that were willing to pay a little bit more to buy that property, is the sale price bumped up? Because they know
It is.
that people are waiting?
It absolutely is.
Okay, so but isn't that an accurate cap rate,
It's not.
kind of capturing that future
Your-
opportunity?
Your, what your, and yes, that is the opportunity. So it's recognized in the marketplace, sure, by agents and by owners and purchasers. So, but what you're seeing, Ben, is yes, the more is paid for that, and then the renovation takes place, and your actual return, so what your cap rate is really based on, is not what that property was generating, which is a lower NOI, but what it will generate when you renovate it. So to say that the cap rate upon purchase, representative of the property as it sat then, not after, is accurate is not the case, because they didn't buy that income, they bought the income that they were going to generate when they renovated.
Okay, but it does include some opportunity in there.
Absolutely, the opportunity is there, and they pay that amount, but the whole crux of this is that they're not buying that apartment block as it sits then, and the income stream. They're buying what they're going to create. And assessment is not what the property can become, it's what the property is as it sits on the date of valuation.
Yeah, okay, I mean, this is an interesting argument, and I'm not trying to be argumentative here, but it's.
And really, I'm not either, I'm
Yeah, I
just
know,
explaining
yeah.
my point.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And let's deal with it once, I guess. So what you're saying is that the assessment department should have thrown out, you've dealt with the 3 sales, that they should have not used them in the cap rate
Yeah,
study.
and I recognize that the city has a lot to go through, but the point is that this is a very key part. So it would be good if the assessment department looked at the sales that occurred in the apartment sphere in particular, and then reviewed whether those properties had then subsequently been renovated and generated an entirely different income stream, and removed those from their study. But it's not always possible. Of course, right? I'm
Well,
just being conversational here.
The thing is, we can only And that's exactly what the legislation says, that we, while yes, in a perfect world, we would be able to go out and reevaluate every property but we need to also be able to rely on the information that is submitted to us, because that's how the process works.
Yeah.
We can't be, every couple months go out and double check, okay, well, now they're asking for this amount on these properties, okay, and now they're asking for this amount, oh, hang on, this month, another one's vacant, so they're asking this much on this property. That's unrealistic. We need to be able to rely on the information that's submitted to us, and then when we've already done our analysis and we're submitting our information and we're in the process in the time of year where we're doing the appeals, and then we're getting new information at that point saying that, oh, hang on, now it's September of 2019, and the information that we submitted a couple years, it wasn't exactly right, so we need to reevaluate and adjust and change, and now take all of those out of your cap rate studies. That's right here where it says that when they provide inconsistent information, they provided the information. This was their opportunity to tell us what they're doing with these properties and how, because this is what we need to base our information on. So now when they're coming, what was it, from 2017? And now they're coming 2 years later and they're saying, whoa, that wasn't the case in regards to that sale. Then we need to be able to say, well, at some point, this information is what's being used for the hearings. And this is what's being used to evaluate the properties. And we can't be going back and saying, well,
So,
we'll just provide whatever information you want over here, but then we're gonna provide different information over here.
so
How about we
may I
just,
respond to that?
well, how about we just agree that the department is under a timeline to prepare cap
Absolutely.
rate studies and value, come up with assessments by law, and you're challenging
Well,
the validity of these four as maybe skewing the cap rate study.
I think it's a larger argument, correct?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
larger
very much.
argument. Your argument is really that the inclusion of, and you've said many apartments are bought with this purpose. So
Mhm.
the inclusion of all of these leads to downward pressure on the city's cap rates, so that they're starting from a low point.
That's
That's the
correct.
larger argument, right?
That
And
is the larger argument.
For that reason, the panel members need to listen to arguments for higher cap rates.
correct.
So I
Yeah, but-
I think it's just that larger argument, it's not about these four necessarily. That's an example for you, and that's an example for you.
And the comment would be that since you've introduced it,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know the intention was to
Help.
perhaps, provide more information, it's created another
More
circumstance.
conversation.
Yeah, so,
Okay,
So I really don't want to, drag this out, but.
no, that's okay,
just
we're
with-
doing it once.
Okay, only once. With regard to the inconsistent information, so again, and we're not, this is what we have to deal with today, and I was able to confirm the information that I provided, but we're not looking at the sale questionnaire here for two of them, because I didn't have access to it. So I don't know what that sale questionnaire says. Maybe it does say it was purchased friendly. I'm not sure. I don't have that in front of me. But it's not that generally you're not going to find, and obviously the world's a big place and maybe there are those circumstances, but generally you're not going to find owners presenting information erroneously or with intent to change it later on. They're just filling out the form, sending it in, and it's not that they're not, maybe they didn't pay attention to that line to check off
I
whether
know,
my intent
of
is
course.
to renovate, when all along it was the intent. So the material is what it is.
Yeah, of course, yeah, it depends on the information available at the time of the questionnaire, who's filling it out, that kind of thing, of course. But that's all the assessor's thing, that's all they have to deal with, or
Fair enough.
to develop.
right? So let's
Yeah.
not
That's
do
your
that.
information. Yeah, so, okay, we've,
Exhausted that?
well, not exhausted, but, you know, it's interesting to hear both sides, and then we're gonna ultimately decide what we think, and, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so are we done with the rebuttal? Now,
I hope
I
so.
think so.
okay. Okay, Mr. Smith, I believe you're presenting your evidence on the value of 1060 Chevrier Boulevard.
Unless you had any questions for the assessor on the presentation, I had no more questions.
Oh, they did that before the
Did you already
rebuttal
do that?
Yeah, we
discussion.
did it, yeah.
My apologies. To start with, I would just ask the panel members to ignore the decisions that are presented at the very back of this brief. They were incorrectly included, and they're representative of an agreement that was arrived at between the assessor and myself, but we didn't have an opportunity to do a 15-1 agreement in advance, so that's not evidence that should be taken into account.
Okay,
Wasn't supposed to be included, it was by accident.
okay.
Pardon me. Moving on to 1060 Chevrier. So again, we are looking at a newly constructed property. I'll just make the point to start with here. We have a brand new property. It's quality construction. The finishes are as shown in the photographs. It's nice. It's certainly going to generate good income on it. There is no opportunity to change this property and obtain a better net operating income. It is at the peak of what it's going to achieve. We don't have new properties being renovated to generate stronger incomes, where you would then get a lower cap rate. So moving on from that, built in 2018, you can see the photographs of it on pages 4 through 5, I guess it is. No, pardon me, 4 through 6. The exterior and the interior, we have 3 one-bedroom units and 3 two-bedroom units for a total of 6. The description is on page number 7 there. If you wish to go through the detail, I think the photos probably speak for it. And the site, as you mentioned, it is on the west side of Pembina Highway. Pardon me, on Chevrier Boulevard, kind of immediately before the main track line. I believe that's CN. Heading from north to south there, just west of Pembina Highway. So it's the property, I guess it's on the corner of the street that's immediately before the train line. So let's move into the valuation. We are not wildly different on this, and because it was built in 2018, we don't have the 2017 information to present to you on expenses, etc. So I've presented the rents for the property as achieved in that first year of operation, projected rents. And we have a gross rental income of $229,020. We've presented some rental comps to back that up. I believe we're slightly higher than the city in the rent that is actually achieved there. We also added some parking income to that number. There is a stall assigned per unit, but then there were a couple of additional stalls, so we included additional parking revenue. Vacancy for the property, if you look at the overall vacancy rate for one-bedroom units between $1,100 and $1,300, it was at 5%. Two bedrooms over $1,300, we're showing 3.2%. We have an equal number of 2 and 3 bedrooms, so we have used a vacancy rate of 4% being fair for the subject property. The expense allowance, we do not have evidence from that prior time frame or a full 2018 necessarily to rely on, so we have deferred to the city's expense allowance percentage, and this generates our NOI of 129,766. Moving into capitalization rates, the page number 16, we present some sales that were within our sphere to gather the information on, and these sales represent properties that were purchased for the actual income stream that was present at the time. There were no subsequent boosts to the revenue to these, and we have a range of 5.44 on the low end for the Ward Avenue property up to 6.65%. We've gone in detail through the cap rate issue of purchase for renovation and reposition, so I will not discuss that. Looking at the market participants themselves, we have two cap rate publications from national commercial brokerages, Colliers and C.B. Richard Ellis. What I've done is give you kind of a time horizon here, 2016 and 2018. You can see that the cap rates are remaining very stable over that time frame. Colliers is indicating 5 to 6% for high rises and 5.25 to 6% for low rises in 2016, and then 5 to 6% for both in the 2018 year. C.B. Richard Ellis, similarly, their study for Winnipeg in 2016 indicates high rises at 5 to 5.75, and low rises of two categories between 5.5 up to 6%. Now, what they, and the same holds true for the 2018 year, they showed no change whatsoever. The bottom chart on the right-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner there is also from C.B. Richard Ellis, indicating cap rates for Winnipeg over a time horizon from 2010 to 2018. You can see a flat lining essentially of the multifamily number that they're showing there, with essentially no change to capitalization rate over a significant period of time in between assessment cycles. So we're not seeing that compression, real compression on purchase for the income stream in place. So what we have here is a smaller apartment block, newly constructed. It is located in a good area in Fort Garry, and we've applied a cap rate of 5.25% for that purpose. We feel that it would certainly generate a strong cap rate, and 5.25% is appropriate. So our final value is $2,472,000 based on that detail.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
Just briefly, are any of your comparables for the cap rate row houses?
No, they are not.
Okay, do you know if any of the cap rates for Colliers or CBRE, do any of those contain row houses?
The Colliers and the CBRE cap rate publication that is put out by the brokerage, so it's their study of the market, but also their impression of what that narrow band of the best investment grade properties would achieve on the marketplace. To be honest, there's not a lot of row house sales in the marketplace, so there's not a lot to rely on there.
Okay. Now, just quickly, touching on the vacancy issue. Which neighborhood is this in?
It's in Fort Garry.
It's in Fort Garry, okay. So,
West of Pembina Highway, if you look at page number 9.
if you've got possibility of 3.1 for vacancy for one bedroom and for 2017, and a 2.6 on two bedrooms, and there's double the two bedrooms compared to the one bedrooms, how did you come up with the 4%?
So we actually have 6 units, 3 of each. And the vacancy rate material that I presented, so if you look at the vacancy rate chart at the bottom of page number 14,
Mm-hmm.
so this is vacancy rate by bedroom type, by rental rate range. So when you get into the upper rents, 1,100, 1,300 for one beds, the vacancy rate was 5%. And for 2 beds over $1,300, the vacancy rate was 3.2. So we actually skewed slightly towards the lower end there at 4%.
How is it that we have that there's 12 suites and you have that there's 6 suites?
Actually, your information says 12.
Oh,
And our
I'm
rents
sorry.
are so close, and our income is so close.
My mistake. So I apologize. They are, my first chart was not changed. I apologize for that. There are indeed 12 suites, as you had mentioned. There's there are eight 2 bedrooms. I apologize for that incorrect
Okay.
statement.
Sorry,
The
just
first
very
page was not
confused for a
changed.
moment.
So yes, there are slightly more 2 bedrooms, so that would skew the vacancy rate towards the 3.2% end, which we did in being at 4%. So our rental rates are shown on page number 11.
Oh,
And you can see the 2 beds are, in that $1,700 range, so well over $1,300.
I'm looking at page 14 with comparing the vacancy. And for 2017, we have 3.1% for vacancy for one bedroom and 2.6 for 2 bedroom.
So you're looking at the top chart,
Yes,
right? Which is the market averages for the areas by bedroom type.
yes.
And if you look at the bottom chart, which is the vacancy rate by rental category, by bedroom type in the city. So what we're pointing out is that we have a newly built property here, higher rents, and the vacancies for those are, as indicated, 5% for the 1 beds over, between 1,100 and 1,300. And 2 beds over 1,300, 3.2. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay.
So that's why we're at 4%.
Now, some of these, so if you look at, let's say Transcona, on the upper, it has 6.9, so we're also taking, there's no division by neighborhood in this one, so we're not taking into consideration that this one is in perhaps a neighborhood that has lower vacancy than some of the others. This is simply by valuation, not by neighborhood, just for clarification.
Yeah, for clarification, that is accurate, and it's based on the rent that's charged. They tend to have some more vacancies in the higher rents. And in terms of the area, there's obviously divisions within an area, so as you go west of Pembina Highway there, they're adjacent to industrial essentially, so.
Okay, and just looking, do you have the information for the actual vacancy for?
They're in the lease-up period.
They're in the lease-up, okay. And as of, what was their vacancy rate within the lease-up period? Are they?
Well, it's ranged from 100% up to, eventually they leased each of the units out, I believe, but I don't know how long that period took. It wasn't instant. Again, you have some premium rents, so it can take a bit more time.
And that would have been reflective in the time period. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Ed, any questions of the appellant?
I had one on the vacancy rate, but that's covered, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, any
I
questions?
have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, any idea on the permit value on the construction of this property?
I do not.
Okay, the current rents being charged?
Current rents, well, the rents in that 2018 timeframe when they were starting out are shown on page 11.
Page 11.
Now, they don't have this information, but they may potentially have to offer incentives as well. I'm not aware.
So the running between, depending on the suite size, of course, or the bedroom size, bedroom count between 1275 and under 1800.
Right, you're looking at 1274 for the one beds and in that upper 1700 range for the two bedroom units.
And you're using 1590s. Close to, yeah, the NOI ends up being nearly the same. You're a little bit higher. Okay. And the tenants pay their own utilities, I believe?
Yes.
Separate forced air units, okay. Any opinion on the difference between row houses and apartments in way of market value?
As I mentioned, there's very few sales of, first of all, there's less row houses out there to be sold, and then there are less sales of them. Don't have a lot of evidence to present to you on it, but I would
Okay,
suggest that there's somewhat less interest given expenses that you often have in greater row house properties.
okay. Yeah, I guess the assessors presented apartments also, so you have also, so, okay. And you're asking us to revise it to $2,472,000, okay. The difference basically is the cap rate.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, our projected NOI, and we don't have any expenses to go on, is very similar to the city, so it is a cap rate issue.
Yeah, okay. All right, I have no other questions. Any requirement for summary, Ms. Martins?
No, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we're gonna, I guess we'll need copies for each property in the docket today, because this is what you're submitting for rebuttal on each of them, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, okay.
It didn't bring
No,
46.
this is clean, so,
No, you just need for filing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I need one and everybody needs one for filing, I need one for each.
Yeah.
So, okay, that
Needs
concludes.
one for filing for each, so that one clean as well.
Yeah.
There. So
Do you have one, Jennifer? No. Or you need one for each
I- she-
filing?
I need one.
Just, you don't have one?
I just have the one.
Ah,
I need it.
No, it's fine, I mean, I can make
oh,
copies.
you don't
if
have
I
a copy
must.
of the rebuttal?
Just the one. I'm keeping the one I got.
Yeah.
okay.
No,
No, I've got it.
It's the
Yeah,
secretary.
it's for the secretary.
Okay, that concludes 1060 Chevrolet Boulevard. Does anybody need a break now, or are we okay to go on to the next one? Okay,
I think
all right.
we're good.
Okay, so next property in the docket is 930 Carrigan Place. And dealing with the 2020 realty assessment. And Mr. Smith, you've submitted, we'll submit this rebuttal regarding the cap rates
Yes,
and the same arguments considered for this, for all the properties on the docket.
correct, yes.
Okay, all right, Ms. Martins, when you are ready, 930 carrying in place, please.
This is roll number 030426731100. The assessed value is $6,961,000. This is packed as commercial row house. It was built in 1978. I'm assuming that the wall height on our front page is incorrect. I'm hoping that the walls are higher than 2 feet. It is zoned RMFS, so residential multifamily. The gross floor area is 58,224 square feet. On page 2, we have some rental comparables, and on page 3, we have the income workup. We have that this one has 60 suites. 30 of those are 2-bedroom and 30 of those are 3-bedroom. We have the average monthly rent per suite at $1,004.99. This gives us the potential income of $723,593. This one has a vacancy of 2.4% with expenses at 50.72% and a cap rate at 5%. This gives us our estimated value at $6,961,000. And again, on the following pages, we have our cap rate evidence. We do have income evidence on this one on page 7, showing the rent at ability to pay, not at market rent, as it's managed housing. And we have overhead pictures on page 9 that show the location and just a shot of the size of the building, of the property.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
Very briefly, just looking at the rental comps, comp number 2 there, 806 Wolseley. Was, that would be newer than the subject of 1985, right? And the size of the units themselves appears to be considerably larger.
Sorry, which one?
Comp number 2, 806 Wolseley, on your page 2.
You look at it right, right?
I have that one at 1321 Beaumont.
Wait a minute, here again. That would help, would it not?
I was confused
Yeah,
because this
my
one,
mistake.
comp number 2 is a little bit smaller.
Yeah, no, my mistake.
Okay.
That's for the next property. And I didn't have, just given the timeframes that we have, I didn't have an opportunity to necessarily go through these. I do have some background on some of them though. 10 Albina Way, those properties are up in a nicer section of the Maples, correct? West of Phillips, backing onto a retention pond. They each have drive-in garages, kind of like attached bungalows. I've presented this material, so I do know that this is the case, but I have to ask it as a question, so.
I will defer to your knowledge.
There's a stretch of 10 through 100 and something Albina Way that's all these connected rental units that have their own garages and back onto them. So that would tend to indicate that that rent would be considerably higher than the subject, would it not?
And it is one of the higher rents there.
Right.
It does reflect that, yes.
Okay, I have not reviewed the other ones in particular, so I will keep my questions to that for the moment. I think we've covered a lot of ground already, so as long as that's all taken into account.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Ed, any questions of the assessor?
Yeah, what was your rationale for the 5% cap rate? What influenced that
That was from the model.
model?
Mhm.
So what did the model consider? Age?
Well, the model considers size, age compared to other properties that we have, neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Linda, any questions of the assessor?
I have no question.
Okay. And neither do I. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Okay, so as with all of the ones presented today, again, please disregard the last, the agreements that are shown on the back, as they are agreements, not decisions. Looking at the subject property, so we're dealing with Manitoba housing property here again. It is social housing provided for citizens of Winnipeg that are on the lower economic end of the scale and need access to low-cost housing. That's mandate of Manitoba Housing, and they provide their units on that basis. So it is rent geared to income for the subject property, so the actual rent they achieve is not representative of market. So our task is to come up with a fair valuation based on what they would receive on the market for rent. So, subject property built in 1978, you have 60 townhome units, 24 of them 2 beds, and 36 3-bedroom units. The finishes are largely original to the date of construction, and there is, as with many, if not most, Manitoba housing properties, considerable degree of wear and tear that is often beyond what one would find in the norm with a standard market apartment. They also have some issues recently with regard to shifting foundations for this particular structure. The photographs of the interior are there for you to see. It's not always easy to convey the condition. It's not in terrible shape, but it's certainly below an average condition in the marketplace. Moving on to valuation, etc. Site is shown on page 8, and it is located in that Fort Richmond area, in an area of heavy multifamily development in this particular area. Pardon me. Moving on to valuation, page number 10. So we don't have actual rents that are in place for the property. If you look at the Fort Garry area and the rents that are shown as an average for there, these are not achievable rents that you would get in a property such as this, in the condition that it is. We've also presented townhome rents from CMHC on page number 11 at the top. As you can see, the universe of townhomes is much smaller, so the reliable statistics from CMHC are somewhat spotty as well, because they only put them out if they have statistical basis to rely upon them. So there's no real stats there from townhomes to rely upon. Given the order that we're presenting in here today, did not work out super quite as I would have hoped, but there's a second Manitoba housing property that we're dealing with here, 150 Dalhousie, which is following this. It is in better condition than the subject property, and it's comprised of all 3-bedroom units, and it is built in a similar time frame, I believe. The rent that is applied by the city there is $984 per unit. So intuitively, we have 2 and 3-bedroom units in lower condition in virtually identical location. We haven't gone below that, but we've applied the $984 in rent to the subject property as well. Same vacancy of 2.4%, and we are in agreement with the expense amount from the city on this as well. So, looking at capitalization rate, we have all heard this quickly, so I'll try and be efficient with it. We're dealing with social housing here, Manitoba housing. There are issues that need to be addressed in determining market value and, of course, cap rate applied. So if you look at my page number 12, they don't typically, social housing doesn't typically trade on the marketplace, and certainly not with an in-place NOI to be relied upon. So if we look at my text there, we have social and affordable housing properties cannot legitimately be directly compared to standard market apartment transactions, as social housing properties have considerable restrictions and burdens that are not present for market apartments. These being rental income restrictions, rental market restrictions, additional operating expenses typically in these type of facilities, physical condition, as I've mentioned, and then on disposition, there are other restrictions as well, where you have tenants in place on a low-income structure, paying rent geared to income. They have the right under residential tenancies to continue forward. So if you're purchasing that property, you get the property in the condition with the tenants that it has. So going forward, how do you negotiate that, and what does that drive as far as the cap rate that you're going to pay for that property? You've got certainly a significant issue as far as time frame of turning it into a standard market apartment that would be accounted for by any astute investor. So page number 12, again, middle of the page, we have a accredited appraiser from the States who's an expert in the field. Mr. Richard Polton has a book entitled Valuation and Market Studies for Affordable Housing, and under that states developing a market-derived cap rate for an income-restricted property begins with an analysis of the available rates for similar unrestricted properties. Then these rates are adjusted based on the risk factors that an investor would consider in developing a cap rate. The result is a cap rate based on market factors and associated risks. In the final analysis, property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, the overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. So, as I had stated earlier, that all is taken into account. We have the same capitalization rate information. We're not at the top end of our range, but we have applied a 6% capitalization rate to the subject property to arrive at our final value of $5,679,000. As I stated, the wrong information was included with regard to decisions at the back of the brief. I have other ones that have come since that time indicating 6% capitalization rates on a number of these Manitoba housing properties, as well as 5.75% cap rates on properties that I participated in. And then we have a number of essentially investment grade premium properties such as Summerland by the University of Manitoba, trading or capitalized in these decisions for this cycle at 5.5%. That is my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions on the appellant's evidence?
Just one, on page 11, are we comparing assessments?
Well, we all know that that's not to be done. I'm, I guess, merely pointing out that intuitively, property with lower condition in the same location with smaller bedroom suites is not going to generate a higher revenue, that's all.
Well, perhaps, is it a possibility that Dalhousie perhaps might be undervalued? So perhaps we should be looking at increasing
I don't believe so,
Dalhousie?
no.
Well, perhaps. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the appellant?
Part of your cap rate is based on the actual condition right now of these units, correct?
To
Your
a degree,
analysis,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, but all the other issues that I stated as well.
If I could ask the assessor, was there a condition code put into the model when you,
Absolutely, there's a condition code on every property that we
so
have.
do you know what the condition is on these?
I don't have it on the brief, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
Was this, I mean, this is a fairly old building, 1978. Was it originally built for low-income housing, or?
Yes,
Okay, so it wasn't like some other government building,
it was
buying
not.
it up? And are you aware of any improvements that the government has made to the building?
The only real, it's largely original. If you have breakage, essentially, they have replaced things in that case, but they have not gone through a refresh program or anything of that nature. It's 1978 vintage.
Same windows?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Mr. Smith, any appeal history on this from the last cycle that you're aware of?
If there is, I did not represent the client, so I'm
Oh, okay.
unaware of
All right.
what it was.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Any requirement for summary, Ms. Martins?
No, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
My only summary is that you're not going to get a lower cap rate on a property such as this versus a Summerland or comparable properties.
All right. That concludes 9:30 Kerrigan Place. We are going to take a 10-minute recess, please. So we'll be back at 20 to 11. Okay, I'll call the hearing back to order. Next property on the docket is 150 Dalhousie Drive. Mrs. Martins, when you're ready, please.
This one is roll number 0304385410. The assessed value is $1,692,000. This one is, its parcel use code is CMMRH, Commercial Row House. It was built in 1975. Again, I think the wall height perhaps needs to be corrected. I don't think there's any space with the 2-foot wall height. The zoning on this one is residential multifamily. The land area is 31,757 square feet. The gross floor area is 14,848 square feet. On page 2, we have some rental comparables ranging from $738 a month to $1,094. And our monthly rent per suite is averaged at $984 a month. There are 14 3-bedroom suites. This gives us a potential income of $165,312 with a vacancy of 2.4%. The expenses are 50.72% with a cap of 4.7%. This gives us our $1,692,000. We have our cap rate evidence, followed by legislation, followed by the income. And again, the income on this property is based on ability to pay, not on market rents. And we've got overhead picture and map on page 9. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
No, I have no questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the assessor?
Interesting, looking at this one where it has a lower rate and a higher cap rate than the last property, must have hit a bar that, where switches go between 1978 and 1975.
Yes.
Seems kind of arbitrary.
The difference too is this one is just 3-bedroom suites. So this one is somewhat different from the other one because the other one also had 2-bedroom suites. And it could be also with the square footage because this one has, the gross floor area is 14,848. So that that might also influence it, it's a smaller size.
One would expect though, if this one has only 3-bedroom suites, that the rent should be, average rent should be higher than the other one? One would expect?
There's been conversation about the demand for 3-bedroom suites. It's quite common that 3-bedroom suites for Manitoba housing properties, there's a very high demand for them because
Correct.
there's a lot of families with more children that need, but on the open market, however, there's less of a demand for 3-bedroom apartments. So if we're going by on a basis of what is market and what's comparable and what we're getting in the income expense mailers for properties that are not subsidized, there's a difference there than there is in properties that are Manitoba housing, and you would expect a higher price because it's a higher demand. But that's,
Okay.
there's a difference there.
Thank you.
Ed, any questions?
No questions, thanks.
And I am good also. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Okay, so 150 Dalhousie Drive, again, this is Manitoba Housing owned property, rent geared income. Property built in 1975, all 3-bedroom units as stated, 14 units. The photographs of the property are on the first couple of pages there. It is in somewhat better condition than the prior one, not, I would term it as average essentially. They have done an exterior renovation, well, not renovation, they've replaced some of the exterior through requirement, as you can see on the bottom of page 4. And the interiors are a little newer than the property that we were dealing with there. Location is virtually the same as the last one. We have a lot of apartment development in Fort Richmond, shown on pages 8 for the site and 9 for the location. Moving into the valuation, we're actually in agreement on the net operating income for the subject property. Difference, of course, being regarding cap rate. And we've gone through our evidence on that significantly here. Again, we're dealing with the same Manitoba housing type property. You do have all 3-bedroom units here. And as noted, there's debate. Manitoba Housing provides 3-bedroom houses because there is a need for that in that socioeconomic segment that they service. And providing that shelter is an important government function, so they serve that. On the open market, there's much less demand for 3-bedroom units, and you see much fewer of them. So that goes towards the demand for this type of property on the open market as well. So we have a capitalization rate of 5.75% for the subject property here. Again, we're seeing cap rates for upper end investment grade properties of significant size at 5.5% in decisions this cycle. So we're at 5.75% given condition and location, etc. So our final value is $1,383,000 for this property.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
Quick question about the orders at the back.
Yes, they're the same ones that shouldn't be regarded.
Okay. Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, that goes for all properties that we're dealing with today. They were included and they were agreements between the assessor and myself.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Ms. Martins? No? Ed, any questions of the appellant?
No questions.
Linda?
No question.
Thank you. And I have no questions either. Requirement for summary, Ms. Martins?
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, you're good? Okay. That concludes 1 Is it 150 or 160? Sorry.
150.
150, okay, $150. That concludes that. Next property in the docket is 390 Carpathia Road, dealing with a 2020 assessment. Ms. Martins, when you are ready, please.
This is roll number 12073862000. Our assessed value is $1,445,000. Sorry, I'm just looking at the classification and liability of this one. This one is owned by Manitoba Housing. It is, it's partially leased as commercial row house. There are 3 buildings. This one was, the actual year built is 1975, and it has effective years built 1975 to 1977. It is zoned residential multifamily. The land area is 43,575 square feet with a gross floor area of 14,408 square feet. If we look at page 2, we have some rental comparables. And they range from $903 to $1,237. This has 12 units, and the average monthly rent is $1,032.17. We have 8 2-bedroom suites and 4 4-bedroom suites. And this gives us a potential income of $148,632. We have a vacancy loss of 2.4% and expenses at 53.19% with a capitalization rate of 4.7, and that gives us our $1,445,000. And we've got the cap rate evidence, the legislation, and then we have an income mailer on page 7 and 8, and an overhead picture on page 9 with a map. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the assessor?
I have no question.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
No questions.
And I have no questions either. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Okay, so subject, we're doing 390, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So
390 Carpathia.
390 and 400, the next roll number that we're dealing with, are Carpathia Housing Cooperative. The wrinkle here is that, as with many of these, when they were developed in the time of high interest rates, the land is not owned by the land that the improvements sit upon is not owned by the Carpathia Housing Co-op. In this case, it's owned by Manitoba Housing and Renewal under a long-term lease. The improvements are, of course, theirs to maintain and operate, but they do not control the destiny of it. Now, normally, for properties like this, I have included text explaining that particular detail and the rights and abilities to sell the property, etc. I see that that was not included in the text today. Suffice it to say, if you're looking at purchase of a property such as this, where the nominal ownership entity, the Carpathia Housing Co-op, they're actually a tenant. They, under the legal operation of that property, they do not have the right to vend it without the cooperation of the land owner, the real owner that they lease the property from. So upon a sale, if they were to look at selling the property, they would have to have the agreement of Manitoba Housing in order to transact that property on the open market. And that leads obviously to complications. Is there additional compensation that is required to Manitoba Housing, is the lease breakable, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're looking at a sales situation on the open market, obviously there's numerous considerations that would come into play that would have an impact on value. So again, it's not Manitoba Housing, it's Carpathia Housing Co-op on a land lease, essentially. The property itself, so 390 Carpathia is part of the greater whole of Carpathia Housing Co-op. This is the much smaller roll number. I'm not sure why there are two roll numbers. It should probably be combined into one. This is my first time representing this this ownership group. Looking at my page number 1, you can see the description of the property here. Site area of 1 acre, 8 2-bedroom units, 4 4-bedroom units, so not 3 beds, but 4 beds, moving up in scale, for a total of 12 units. As a cooperative, their mandate is obviously to provide affordable rental accommodation in the marketplace. The pictures of the property begin on page 2 and run through page 6. Dominantly original interiors to these units. If you look at the flooring in particular, you can get a good sense that it has not been replaced and or renovated except where absolutely necessary. Again, it's a situation where if things are broken, then they receive upgrades. There's been no mass renovation or refresh in these units. You can see the interiors there. Further description is on page number 7. We're looking at generally a base level of finishes with regard to the flooring as well as cabinetry, etc. So that is shown on page 7. There have been a very small percentage that have had some replacement in recent years, but not significantly throughout the whole project. The site is shown on page number 8, as well as the location on page number 9. Moving on, there's just a bit of a blurb on cooperative housing on page 10. I'll leave that to you to read if you wish, but we can move on to the valuation on page number 11. And the housing charges. So the in-place housing charges that are applied to the units are shown at the bottom of the page there. $912 for a 2-bedroom unit and $1,044 for the 4-bedroom units. You can move on to page number 12 and you can see our rental comparables as provided. These are a combination of cooperative housing at the top of the page as well as market housing below that. Now, it's rare to be finding 4-bedroom units in the marketplace, so there's not a lot of those to show you, but we've done our best in providing comparables there. So 11 Dorset through 1800 boroughs are housing cooperatives. So that would be number 1 through number 7. You can see the rental rate ranges for the particular type of units there, and then we have some market ones below that. So 2-bedroom rent of what the subject is charging is not unusual in the marketplace. 4-bedroom rents, there's very few of them. Keep in mind the finishes that we're looking at in the interior there. We present the CMHC data on page 13. Again, very few townhomes, so there is no reliable stats from CMHC to determine rent. So our contention is that the rents in place are fair for the property that we're looking at. And again, given regulations, the tenants, cooperative unit residents do have the right to continue forward under the structure that they're in if the property were to vend. So if it were to trade, you're not immediately going to have the opportunity to apply some different rental scheme to the structure. So the rents in place are what we've used. They come to $137,664, to which we've added parking income that they generated in that year as well, which is nominal $711. There is no common laundry facilities, so there's no laundry income. The vacancy that we've applied to the subject property is 2.4%. As with all multifamily properties, there is a degree of coming and going, and so they wouldn't be significantly different in terms of vacancy that would be applicable in the market. The operating expenses for the subject property, if you look at the bottom of page number 15, the most fair way to apply operating expenses is to look at the history of the property and make any revisions or adjustments that are required in arriving at a stabilized number. So we present you 3-year history of each of the categories that they have for operating expenses. You can see what we've done to stabilize those. In most places, it's a 3-year average where there's no common trend line, either going up or down. In the case of property taxes, it's actual. And property management, we apply 5% of effective gross income of standard representation of market. This brings us to our NOI that we then have to capitalize. I'm not going to go through, again, our entire presentation on capitalization rates. The material that is presented is the same. We do have, and 390 and 400 are part of a whole complex. You're not going to buy one without the other, so what's applied to 400 would be applied to 390 as well, in terms of capitalization rate, certainly. So we have the same issues with regard to issues on disposition. If you look at, and this will be easier to show on number 400, but if you look at the scale of the property, we have a combined total of 160 plus units with a land area of 1 acre for 390 and call it 12 acres for 400. It's a very large area. You have to maintain all of that exterior land, including the grass, the walkways, the parking, etc. There's higher costs associated with that. Beyond that, you have a townhome situation. So it's not an apartment where you have one roof. You have multiple buildings with multiple roofs. You have each individual unit with their own heating system, water tank, etc., etc. So there's always going to be higher costs for townhome properties such as this. So we have applied a capitalization rate of 6%, again, based on the information I provided you before, and the issues that I've discussed here today. Happy to go through them in more detail, but applying the 6% cap rate brings us to a market value of $914,000. And if you look at my page number 20, it summarizes our valuation versus the city's. 4.7% capitalization rate is simply not market for properties such as this, or the market in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions of the appellant?
Yes. When you're looking at using the actuals as opposed to using the model, and when we're looking at the vacancy, you decided to use the model 2.4% as opposed to using the actual of $912?
Yes, so we're looking at a one-year submission there when you look at the $912, so.
Now
it's-
hypothetically, if we went to actuals for the vacancy as well as using the actuals for rent and for expenses, what difference in value would that make using your 6% capitalization rate?
I haven't calculated that as I've not done it. We can certainly do that math, but my point would be that we're looking at all properties in the same manner across the board. So in doing these valuations, there is a standardization, and this is in the education and theory for both assessment and appraisal. You do need to apply a vacancy allowance in order to arrive at a net operating income. So to remove it from one would be singling out an individual property.
Well, that being said, but if we're being equitable, if we're doing, creating stabilized expenses and we're not using model, we're switching over to using the actual stabilized expenses and actuals for rent, but then we're switching over to staying with the model for one item that benefits. It seems like a very little thing, but it actually does, when you calculate it out, it makes a more significant difference in the valuation of it. And I think that it's quite easy to glaze over it when it's like, oh, it's only 2.4%. So when you're looking at these things and you're saying, okay, well, you know what, our expense allowance, really, we're very close. And then on all these other things, we're really close. But then we're saying, okay, well, we'll use actual when it benefits us, but we'll use model also when it benefits us. Instead of saying, okay, well, you know what, we're going to switch to actuals, or we're going to stay with model. Because otherwise you're getting it on both ends, kind of.
Yeah,
You know
no,
what I mean?
I understand your point. I certainly disagree with it, and
Of course.
I'll explain that, of course. We were just dealing with Manitoba housing properties where they're rent geared to income, so there really is no rent to rely upon in those circumstances, so there's nothing to apply on that front. We're not, and I just using the colloquial term, but we're not cherry picking individual components here to apply a vacancy rate for this and not for another one. The standard valuation methodology across the board, whether it be in the assessment sphere or in straight appraisal, is that you do account for vacancy in determining a net operating income and ultimately market value, because buildings do become vacant at some point, whether that's in the commercial sphere, whether they're multi-tenant or single-tenant, or in the multifamily world, you do experience vacancy. And you don't look at a one-year time horizon, you look at a multi-year time horizon, and that's why it's applied. So there's always vacancy applied. We're not singling out this one that there should be vacancy or not. We test our rents against market as well as the operating expenses, so we're not being inequitable in applying it. In fact, if I look at the vacancy, the 2.4 in particular, I mean, I'm not getting into area versus area here, but I think this particular area would be 2.7%. So theoretically, we could apply a higher vacancy rate, but we're not.
Well, since we were adjusting the vacancy rate we were looking at adjusting the vacancy rate on the other one, and we're not looking at adjusting the vacancy rate on this one, and it just looked to
Oh, I
me,
see.
because it's very similar to difference in the vacancy, if you go from actual to model, is very similar to the difference in expenses if you go from your stabilized expenses to the model. So when you
Yes.
balance that out, then, you know, what
I
the
understand
adjustments
your
that were
point.
made. Thank you.
I do understand your
Yeah.
point. The difference with the other one is the rental level that we're talking about and the increased vacancy that they do experience versus the standard market. In that prior property that we were looking at that was newly constructed, et cetera, et cetera.
That being said, perhaps these ones experience a lower rate of vacancy.
At 2.4%.
Just making a point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, Linda, any questions?
If you were to have a turnover of 1 suite a year, you would have an 8% vacancy rate, is that not correct?
Well, if I was just looking at their actuals and.
Correct.
Yeah.
Understood. Which one are we on? Him?
Mr. Smith is on the hot seat.
You talked about the restrictions on changing tenants after being a restriction with these particular buildings because of the rent guarantee income.
Mhm.
Is it not true under the rent regulations that if you purchase a building with the intent of doing a complete overhaul, that there is actually an allowance for moving the tenants?
Yes and no, in that those tenants do have the right to serve out the term of their lease, and I believe it's first right of refusal to go forward as the tenant in that space too. So you have a very significant property here, so your time frame, you know, I don't know what their specific rental structure is. It's in terms of the end of the term of the lease. Sometimes they can be longer with cooperatives, et cetera. So what is that time horizon, and what does that cost you to carry that property? You know, as a cooperative housing property, I cannot imagine the fuss that a purchaser on the market would experience in buying one and then trying to evict all of those 20, 30-year tenants out of their homes, essentially.
Correct, and if you look at examples of where subsidized housing has been sold into the private market, because there are some, is it not the case that the government has continued to subsidize that housing under a different structure to mitigate those kinds of circumstances? Which would then, of course, affect the cap rate of the sale, or the sale price.
Yeah, in some circumstances, yes. I know there was a property on Selkirk that sold that was Manitoba Housing owned, but it was taken over by the entity that operated it. So it was a government to nonprofit transfer essentially, and it continued on as it was.
Correct, and I think another example might be 185 Smith. Are you aware of the circumstances that happened when that one was sold into the private sector?
Very, very, very much. I was intimately involved with that one, and the end product is going to be so very, very different than what it was previously.
But in terms of the tenants?
Every tenant was, are we talking the Manitoba Housing property?
Yes.
Okay, yes, they were, well, there was various floods, and then they were moved out, and then the building was never reoccupied as they decided to sell it on the market. They had 377 bachelor units or something
Correct.
like that. It's now going to be 200 luxury units, which are going to have loft apartments and views and balconies, I believe, and the investment in that by a very financially strong apartment ownership family in Winnipeg is very significant, and it entirely changes what that project will be.
Correct. Thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
Can you just clarify for me potential problems with the fact that the housing co-op as a tenant doesn't own the land.
Right.
And like what happens in the free market or that?
Right, so it's an unusual circumstance, obviously, right? If that were to occur. So just in the commercial market, you have instances where a tenant will be given a land lease, essentially. They're allowed to build their, Tim Hortons or what have you on the site, and at the end of the term, the structure is not theirs to retain. It reverts back to the landowner, or they can have them tear it down. That's up to them. The circumstances for other co-ops that I've looked at was the same structure, and I haven't been able to review it with this, but I imagine it's identical, is the same, that at the end of the term, the land reverts, or the property as a whole, including structures, reverts back to the landowner, that being Manitoba Housing. Now, is Manitoba Housing going to do that necessarily? Not necessarily, but that option is there, right? That they could reclaim it if certain circumstances were to make that something that they had to or needed to do. They could do that. So upon sale, you're buying a property that isn't controlled by one entity. They don't own that land. Is there additional compensation that Manitoba Housing would require from you as a private owner buying that? I would suggest there would be. It's a very significant site of, I'm going to say, over 13 acres, I think it is in size.
I have a supplementary question.
Just one little one. The difference in the expenses, the 59% versus 53. Can I assume then that that's largely due to the exterior and the amount of additional land that's around those buildings?
Well, it would be itemized on page 15 there, but I don't know specifically how the number that the city has is derived. But there's just more maintenance for townhouse properties and ones with significant land areas as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Do you know what the term of the land lease is?
I do not. Typically, they're 30, 40, 50 years,
Not
but I do
99?
not have this one.
They're not 99?
Pardon me?
They're not 99 years, which is a very common long-term.
Right.
Lease?
Not the ones that I've seen. I do quite a number of these cooperative housing properties, as you'll see. 60 years is what I've seen as the most. Maybe there are some that are more.
I mean, 30 or 40 years would have been over with this one, right? With built in 1975.
So, and I don't want to speak to what the term was because I don't know, but they're still on, Manitoba Housing is still on as the owner, so maybe there was a renewal if that happened, but in any case, they would still be the controller of the property overall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, regarding the expenses, I'm looking on page 15.
Mhm.
The average is about 77,000, and then you have, you've included the 5% management that the city doesn't do anymore, I guess, but you're using 80,230.
Right. So let's just
I'm
run
just
through
running
those.
out
I see that
stakeholders.
it's actually very close. The 2017 number was close to the cities. If you look at what we've done, the insurance itself, typically insurance goes up slightly every year, so we used the 2017 actual, probably be slightly higher than that for 2018. Property management, we actually reduced to the 5%. Professional fees is a 3-year average. Office supplies is nominal. It's a 3-year average. It's not unusual. can go down the list there, but we haven't
I think it's the
artificially
R&M.
increased it.
Yeah, it's her.
The
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
yes, you're right, sorry, I see it now. We used $1,000 a suite. This is well within a norm for the marketplace. In fact, you'll often see amounts significantly higher than that. They've been spending less as a cooperative, and you can see it in interiors. The change there is just representative of market again. We're not cherry picking, and we've been conservative in what we applied.
But you are using actuals except for that line, where you've averaged, or you've gone upwards by about $3,500, which is probably the difference.
It would be.
Percentage difference.
Right, and again, the reason for that is that their underspending on their R&M is very, very evident when you go through the units. $1,000 is certainly light, particularly for an older property such as this. So that's the methodology behind it, that's all.
Okay,
May I ask one more question?
of course.
So if we're adjusting the RM up to be more indicative of market, which $1,000 a suite is still on the low side, I think. And then, and we discussed the deferred maintenance and the issues of deferred maintenance, and then the cap rate should be higher because of deferred maintenance. Isn't that looking at the same problem from two directions?
No, we're arriving at a stabilized income stream,
Okay, which impacts the NOI?
which impacts the NOI, yes.
Okay, and then the capitalization rate is again reflecting the reduced amount spent on, on repair and maintenance, but we're not, in the stabilized NOI, we're not reflecting the lowered amount spent on maintenance. Does that make sense?
I see what the point that you're putting forth, but I would
Thank you.
I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Okay. Any requirement for summary, Ms. Martins?
No, thank you.
Mr. Smith?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. That concludes code 390, Carpathia Road. Next one. Okay, next on the docket is 400 Carpathia Road. So I guess we've got the sister property. Next. Miss Martins, when you are ready, please.
This is roll number 12073863000, 400 Carpathia Road. The assessed value is $15,007,000. This again is commercial row house, built in 1975, zoned residential multifamily with a land area of 489,162 square feet and a plan area of 73,486 square feet with gross floor area of 146,972 square feet. On page 2, we have some rental comparables ranging from $950 to $1,400. We have a suite count of 140. This is 46 two-bedroom suites, 82 three-bedroom suites, and 12 four-bedroom suites, with a monthly rent per suite average at $996.99, which gives us a potential income of $1,674,943. We have a vacancy loss at 2.4%, with expenses at 54.1%, and a cap rate at 5%, which gives us our $15,007,000. Again, we have our cap evidence and legislation, followed by the income mailer that was given to the city, and then the overhead view of the property. And you can see the last property we spoke about is up in the corner there. And on the back page, we have a map just to show the location. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, any questions?
Yes, I do. The model that the city uses in multifamily here, that includes an allowance for vacancy loss?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and what is the reasoning for that?
Because it's reflective of market.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the assessor?
I wonder what the rationale is for the 5% cap rate versus the 4.7 for the property on the same, right beside each other.
Cap rate is reflective of risk. Now, if you take a look at the overhead picture on page 9, 390, you take a look at that one, and there's, 12 units. So you're looking at 12 tenants, and you're looking at what the risk is of having vacancies, what the risk is of damage and increased cost of repairs. Let's say you have a circumstance where you need to go in, there's complaints to the tenancy branch per se, and you need to go in and repair all 12 units, or you need to replace all 12 kitchens. So the risk involved in that and the expense involved in that is somewhat different than having to replace, let's say, the fridges in all 140 units. So that the size difference is a big influence on adjusting the cap rate for this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
No questions.
And I have no questions either. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, 400 Carpathia Road.
Sure, so let's just continue on with that particular point. If you look at the page number 1 of the prior presentation, 390 Carpathia, and page number 1 of this one, in the legal description, you can see that we have a single title for this property. It's all one property. You're not buying 390 separately from 400. It's a unit. Why it's divided into 2 roll numbers, I'm not aware. It probably should be combined into one overall. It hasn't for whatever reason. I'm just newly active on this. So there would be no difference. You're buying the entire 162 unit property as a whole. So applying a lower cap rate is simply a quirk of the model, it being broken out into a smaller portion of the overall site.
Thank you.
The property itself, again, part of the greater whole. This is the larger component, obviously. We have 140 units in total, built in 1975. Largely of original condition. There's been no widespread renovation here, nor is there a specific one planned. That's not to say that there haven't been a couple of units that have had some refresh done. They have, and I did ask that question specifically. It's an important part. It would be a very small component of the overall whole of the building. So the pictures that we present are indicative of the property as a whole. So again, Carpathia Housing Co-op, I'll just quickly go through the photographs there. You can see the overall site plan at the top of page 10 according to their diagram as they had it originally constructed. We have 2 through 5 bedroom townhomes. You can see some exteriors on pages 2 and 3. What I draw your attention to is At the top of page 3 and bottom of page 3, actually, we have two photos of it. You can see the significant shifting that has occurred with this particular building. Moving back in the site plan to page number 2, there's two buildings that they currently have like this with significant foundational issues that they are going to have to undergo repairs for at a very significant cost. It's 2 at this point, but obviously you have a larger site there. So there are capital issues that certainly do crop up on properties of this size over time. The photographs of the interior give you a good indication of the fit out of them, largely original. You have wood framed windows. The kitchens are certainly not upgraded and are very worn typically. Some are in better condition, some are in worse, but overall it's of its vintage without any improvement. We have 2 through 5 bedroom units. Again, 4 and 5 bedroom units in particular, very rare on the marketplace. We have 8 and 4 of those. Then we have 82 3-bedroom units, 82 out of 140 unit property. The overall demand for 3-bedroom units on the marketplace is not super strong. They tend to be more of them in the cooperative and or social housing sphere. So that's what we're looking at as far as the property goes. Moving on to the valuation. The actual housing charges are shown on page number 11. We do believe that they are indicative of the market for this property. The rental rate comparables are shown on page number 12 with the CMHC stats on page number 13, which we've already reviewed. Given the vintage of the property and condition, the purpose of it, certainly we believe that the in-place rental rates are reflective of what would be achieved on marketplace there. And again, keep in mind, it's very rare that you would find 4 and 5 bedroom units on the market in my knowledge. We've also included parking revenue, and there is no laundry revenue. Moving on to the expense side, as always, we include a standardized vacancy in our allowances to compare apples to apples. And our expense history is shown at the bottom of page number 15, where we stabilize the expenses for the 2018 year. You can see that in this case, the stabilization works out, and it's done in exactly the same manner. It works out to be $1,000 roughly higher than the 2017 year end. We did make adjustments downwards for property management and adjustments upwards to $1,000 a suite for the R&M, which is clearly evident. And capitalization rate we have already discussed, so I will not go through that again, other than to say we're not going to get a different cap rate for this portion of the property versus the other. To that end, and I wasn't able to present this in my materials, but I have a Manitoba housing property at 130 Tuxedo Avenue from this cycle, decided at a 6% capitalization rate. I have another housing cooperative at 11 Dorset, decided at my valuation essentially with rental rate change, but using my cap rate of 6%. Another housing cooperative or portion of at 81 Tyndall, decided at a capitalization rate of 6%, which was my cap rate for that as well. So that is my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions, Ms. Martins?
Just one in regards to the R&M
Mhm.
the increasing it to the 1,000. So the rent is reflective of a history of not putting in the repairs and maintenance that are standard in order to keep the property at an average, but we're still increasing the repair and maintenance up as though it is. So we're reducing the income based on not doing repair and maintenance, but we're increasing the repair and maintenance expense as though we were doing appropriate maintenance.
Well, the market rent, the rent that is applied is meant to be reflective of what they're renting, but it's also in keeping with their mandate and is meant to reflect market to a degree as well, right?
I
So
agree, but then
the-
their repair and maintenance is not
Repair and
reflected.
maintenance, the repair and maintenance is simply reflecting the low end of the market at $1,000 per suite. So it's not that they're well under market on the rental side, because of that, they're within market range in our estimation on the rental side.
And perhaps if they were putting in the standard market repair and maintenance, then their apartments would be closer to average condition and would perhaps be commanding the increased in rents, because when you put in repairs and maintenance and then apply to the tenancy branch, you are able to increase the rent, and that would be benefiting them in increasing the NOI instead of bringing the NOI down based on the actual rents, which are within market, and using the increased repair and maintenance, which is still well within market, but it's not what is actually being put into the building. Is that?
I understand,
Okay.
but disagree.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, any questions?
I have no further questions.
Thank you. Ed, any questions of the appellant?
One question. You've indicated that there are two roll numbers for this property and they should be combined.
Yes.
What responsibility do you have to achieve that?
Well, me personally, now that I'm operating or acting on behalf of the owner, I have made them aware of that, and they will need to make application to combine those two roll numbers into one. But prior to this, I do not represent the client.
So there is a
it's
process to do that.
There is a process to do that, yes.
But
My
it's-
thought is that probably this section was built first and was put on a roll number, and then the greater whole was constructed, but I don't have that background, so.
Do you see any problems with getting that done?
That would be up to the city. I have, I shouldn't speak out of turn here, but I've made applications to combine roll numbers in the past a number of years ago that have not happened to date, but let's not go there.
All right, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, and I have no questions either. Any requirement for selling, Ms. Martins?
No, thank you.
Mr. Smith, you good? No, I'm fine, thank you. Okay, last property on the docket, 10 Shelmerdine Drive in Charleston. Okay. Dealing with the 2020 realty assessment. Ms. Martins, when you're ready, please.
This property has a roll number of 010035890000. It has an assessed value of $21,722,000. This again is commercial row house. There's 4 buildings.
Wow.
And it was built in 1978. It is zoned residential multifamily. It's got a gross floor area of 267,644 square feet. Page 2 has some comparable rents, and page 3 has the income workup. We have 188 suites. There's 21 one-bedroom. There's 33 two-bedroom, 123 3-bedroom and 11 4-bedroom, with an average monthly rent per suite at $1,074.63. We have a potential income of $2,424,365. We've applied a vacancy loss of 2.4% and expenses at 54.1%, with a cap of 5%, which gives us the estimated value of $21,722,000. We have the cap rate evidence in the legislation, and we do have a mailer on page 7 through 10, and an overhead view on page 11. Oh, and on page 12, there's maps so that we can, to help find where this property is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Martins. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
This is difficult to ask because it's not presented in your material there, but there's been a significant change in the valuation model for the subject property between cycles. Are you able to comment on that?
I'm not able to comment on that. I was not aware of that. I
Okay.
was looking at the current value.
The capitalization rate in particular was changed from 6% in the 2018 year to 5%.
I can't speak to
You
that. I
can't?
don't know if that
Okay.
was attained through an agreement or through a
No, that was the
decision,
model.
or if it was, I have no idea.
That's my only question, thank you.
Thank you. Linda, any questions of the assessor?
No question.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martin, I'm looking on page 8 of your presentation with the income and expense statement, and they're declaring a NOI of $1,124,480. Would you consider that to be accurate? I don't know if you analyze this income and expense.
Well, this one is again involved with Manitoba Housing. So, but it again, it's like the co-op, it's classified as ADT. So I'm not sure if this is, I'm under the impression that this is again some type of co-op.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would not be indicative of market.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's my only question. Mr. Smith, when you are ready, please.
Sure. So just again, to that point, it's not necessarily that they're not indicative of market. They do look at market when they're establishing what rents are applied. So let's, just to start with, flip to my page number 22. This is the summary of the valuation that we have for the property for 2020 compared to the city's valuation of the property for 2020 compared to the city's valuation of the property for 2018. So if you look at the two city models for the subject property, they have decreased the rent somewhat at the top end there, not down to where they are, but they have decreased it. They have decreased the expense allowance, so we ultimately end up with a higher NOI by a significant amount from the 2018 year, but the major change that you then see is a drop from 6% capitalization rate down to 5% capitalization rate. This is not the decision of the board, this was the model of the city for 2018 and the model for 2020. I see no change in the marketplace driving a cap rate drop of 1% for a property such as this in the marketplace. It simply doesn't happen that way. Let's flip back to the beginning of my brief. Page number 1, we have a chart giving you a bunch of information on the property. Let's look to start with at the appeal history of it. Before my time, there was an appeal for 2012 where an agreement was reached ultimately by certificate at the municipal board, dropping it from 16.6 to 13.6. 2014, they had an internal change of management. There was no appeal filed at that time. For that reason, they were not aware of the process, etc. 2017, 2017, our firm appealed it. It was reduced from 20.3 million to 16.9 million. We've appealed this to the municipal board. 2018, the assessment was 17,151,000. It was not reduced at the board of revision. We appealed this to the municipal board. And now we're looking at an increase of roughly $4.5 million from 2018 to the 2020 year. This is not representative of market for the subject property. The same circumstances exist here. Manitoba Housing owns the land. The lessee is West Point Park Housing Cooperative Limited. Property was built in 1978. It has a component that is an apartment that is 21 one-bed units and 14 two-bed units. The balance being townhomes, 21 two-beds, 122 three-beds, and 10 four-bedroom units. The property does have significant deferred maintenance that they are taking care of over time as funds allow. If you look at the exterior of the property, it's very of its vintage and very of its type, cooperative from that 1978 era. A lot of wood on the outside. Obviously, this lasts, but does run its course and ends up with water issues, etc. The roofing is shown at the top, and then we get into the interiors themselves. As you can see in the photographs, water condensation issues with some of the windows. And while both a nice feature but problematic, they have a lot of skylights throughout the property, and you can see that at the bottom of page 6, and the leakage associated with that. Very common with skylights, obviously. Description of the property is further done on page number 7. A lot of them are stacked townhouse units. Probably see that from the exteriors on some of them. The further description is given there. I'm just going to hit the highlights here. Cabinetry and flooring is typically original. Again, there has been a small percentage that has had some replacement, but it's not an overall scheme. It's on an as-needed basis, essentially. They had a property condition report done in 2018 by HLC Consulting, professional engineers, to determine deficiencies of their structures. And they identified the following items at the bottom of the page: exterior siding, doors and windows, parking lot, roofing, suite interiors, and downwards. You can go through the list. They identified $8.8 million roughly in issues that would require addressing. The life expectancy of the majority of these items has been exceeded. If you look at the roof and the siding, obviously it's beyond its term. Cedar siding has 25-year expectancy. They're at 38 years at this point. To date, they have repaired the elevator and spent $250,000 on the roof. out of an expected 1.1 million. So that's the property that we're looking at. 13.4 acre site shown on page number 9. You can see the significant extent of the grounds as well as the circulation driveway and parking. Location is shown on page number 10. We get into cooperative discussion on page 11 that we won't review. And we can move on to the valuation on page 12. Again, we do feel that the rental charges that are in place are representative of market for the property. They're presented at the bottom of page 12. You can see our rental comparables on page number 13. There's exceptionally few 4 and 5 bedroom units on the marketplace to compare it to, and will that drive a significantly higher rent? Typically, if you're renting and you're needing 4 and 5 bedrooms, you tend to be on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, so it's not like you're going to be renting a higher end product, etc. So moving on, we believe that the in-place rental rates are representative. They would go forward if you bought the property at the valuation date, so we've used the in-place rental rates as shown. We've added the parking revenue that they achieve, and there is some laundry revenue from the apartment portion of the building. Pardon me. In the overall explanation here, as it has arisen in the past, as they provide their income and expense, there is a subsidy that they receive from CMHC. This amounted to, as it's shown there in the I&E, we don't, that essentially just brings them up to the market rent levels that are shown. It's not an additional amount. The point that we're pointing out here is a different subsidy, that being from CMHC, and is specifically related to mortgage relief of $288,000. If you go through the text on page 16, and we're probably getting on beyond our time here, I won't go through this in detail, but suffice it to say, the analysis appraisers perform is typically on a before financing basis, since the decision of financing or not is discretionary, and the loan value ratio mortgage rate and terms vary from individual investor and property. Items to be excluded from consideration in expenses include obviously financing considerations. We can get into that if you want to, but let's move beyond. I just wanted to cover it. It's not an extra amount that they're receiving, it's simply a function of interest rates being so sky high at that time frame, which is also why they're on leased land. Vacancy rate applied is 2.4%. The expense allowance we have stabilized for the year 2018 year, as you see at the bottom of page 17. In this case, our stabilization done in the same way would result in roughly $100,000 less than the prior full year for expenses. Now, all of our same comments hold true with regard to capitalization rate. I trust that we're keeping all of that commentary in mind. We have a property that is dominantly townhouse, huge amount of area and structure to maintain, significant deferred maintenance that is imminently required, as shown by the study done by the owners through an engineer. We're not asking for anything out of the ordinary or beyond what the market itself is showing for standard apartments at the 6% capitalization rate that we're asking. This is not a significant premium. We're not saying it's, you know, a poor area and should receive an extra amount because of where it is would drive lower investor interest. That's not it. The 6% is within market and is certainly indicative of what it would derive in the market. So capping our NOI at 6% gives us a final market value of $17,359,000. This is a significant increase in our own valuation from the prior cycle, as they did have some increase in their rent over that time frame as well. But again, we're not seeing 1% drops in capitalization rate in the marketplace, so I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Martins, any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And any questions of the appellant?
No, I have no questions.
Thank you. Ed, any questions?
No questions.
Okay. You know, I'm gonna ask the assessor one question. Considering the deferred maintenance that's being presented here today, is this building assessed as being a fair, average condition?
You know what, I'm not sure whether it is or not.
Okay.
I don't have it on me.
Okay,
But we do have in our mailer that was looked at, we do have that there are significant capital costs that are amortized over time, and the repair and maintenance costs that we have are comparable with what is reported. So I think that in review, that was looked at.
okay. Yes, thanks. Mr. Smith, I have no questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jennifer, too. That concludes our hearing for today. Thank you both for appearing.